ask a question about the process, about how campaigning might unfold? So in past elections, there's typically been a lightning rod that the PAP has gathered their forces around. Do you anticipate that potentially happening at this coming election? And more importantly, how receptive or unreceptive will the ground be to that? How might it affect the outcome in some sense?
Well, I mean, the PAP has, I think, effectively threw its lightning bolts, really, right? I mean, I think they have a. I think Mr. Chen Shou Mao, right, who sits on the SMU Law School Advisory Board, has attracted a personal letter from the PAP's organizing secretary, right, Dr. Ng Hen. So I'm not sure, Devin, that sort of tactic is going to sit well, right, with the voters. I think increasingly voters are more concerned about a level playing field. And I don't think voters like to be told, how they should cast their votes or what the sort of questions they should ask. But I don't know. I certainly hope that that the fact that the PAP has asked this question at this stage, indicates that they may not want to put it on the agenda when the hustings come around. So in a way, a preemptive move. Right, to get voters to think about the sort of issues that they think, that relate to Mr. Chen's motivations.
I think negative campaigning is part and parcel of the election process. So I believe we can expect that we will get to experience some of this in this particular election. But I agree with Eugene that voters, I think, if they get the feeling that one side or the other is, digressing from the main issues, which Eugene and myself have already stated in the slide that I put up, at least the key issues being the high cost of living, the price of housing, and the influx of immigrations. If negative campaigning and personal attacks tend to digress from that, I think voters will really recoil from those kinds of personal attacks. I would also like to point out that this has also been the experience in previous elections. Go back to 1984 when Mr. Cham Si Tong first stood on the SDP ticket against Mr. Ma Bao Tan, when the then Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, compared Mr. Ma's O-level results with Mr. Cham's results. And that didn't go down very well with the people in Potong Pasir. The last rally that the PAP held there were a lot of heckles from the crowd to the effect of 6 A's go home. And that propelled Mr. Cham to Parliament. In the last general election, 2006, unfortunately, Senior Minister Goh made the remark that somehow Mr. Cham Si Tong was rather old. At that stage, 2 or 3 days before polling day, all indications were for the PAP was going to take Potong Pasir. Why? It was because Senate Estate, which was part of Potong Pasir, the PAP had won the majority vote in Senate Estate in 1997 and 2001. And Mr. Cham was running behind in Senate Estate. And Senate Estate, you have all these quite elderly people who I do not think took too kindly to senior minister's remarks that about an elderly person. So I would say that, if people engage in negative campaigning, they have to be very careful about what they say. That's all I would add.
One is about sort of adding a few issues to the mix for you to consider, and the second is about what this sort of means for the PAP. The first is, you haven't mentioned, although you imply when you talk about poverty, you haven't focused on the issue of inequality, aka elitism. You also haven't mentioned about the casino and aka gambling. And you also, even though I think Eugene touched on this a little bit in his implications, the issue specifically for the ethnic minorities, aka hard truths involving the Malay community, Taipusam chanting for the Indian community, and the sensitivities that may exist among specific ethnic communities that are perhaps more salient this election than even last election. And especially because they're also connected into the immigration issue. So I raise these as issues for your consideration to comment on. The second issue that I think is fascinating to listen to your discussion, which I think both of you were excellent, and that is you don't talk about Lee Hsien Loong. In the sense that there is, usually there's a perception that an election is a mandate for a prime minister. Why is he missing in your discussion?
I never thought about that.
Okay, Derek, you go ahead.
On the casinos, I actually wrote an entire book, which of course all of you would want to get a copy of. So I'm giving the subject a bit of a rest and focusing on the general elections. In fact, one journalist from the Straits Times contacted me a few days ago to comment on this recent thing about junkets and casinos. I said, I do not want to distract from all the comments I'm making on the GE, so I'm not going to comment on casinos. But, I mean, more seriously on your point, let me hazard something here that I think after the general election, the government may introduce more social safeguards to protect Singaporeans in relation to their access to the casinos. That is my feeling. So a few policies I think are being put on hold till after the general election, and I think they are going to relook the whole thing with regard to the casinos. Inequality, yes, I think it's a very important issue, and this relates to the widening income gap between the top 15 to 20% in society and then the rest. And this tends to, in a small country, essentially a city-state, a densely populated city-state, this can be magnified perceptually many times over. So, yes, I think it will play as an issue in this election. On Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, all I want to say about this particular issue is that I will not be surprised if one of the opposition parties actually fields a team in Ang Mo Kio GRC for the reason that I mentioned in my presentation. It is now it is a six-member GRC. Back in 2006, the Prime Minister's team took 2 out of 3 votes, meaning to say it lost 1 out of 3 votes. When they carved out from Aljunied Workers' Party strongholds and absorbed it into Ang Mo Kio GRC, that some people can say is that the PAP may have been trying to be too clever by half. Because if a credible opposition party was to field a team there, and it would definitely be better than the novice Workers' Party team which fielded there in 2006, the Prime Minister's vote could actually slump quite badly to 60% or below from 66%. You cannot discount that possibility. So I don't know. That could also be a nomination day surprise. We'll have to wait and see. Eugene.
Yeah, thanks, Bridget, for those questions. No, I think we'll see more of the Prime Minister in due course, right? I think he is the big gun, and I think the plan now is for the other PAP leaders to deal with the other issues first. But you can see in his own way he's been trying to talk to voters, right? So they had two question time with the Prime Minister, one in the English language and one in the Chinese language. I think we'll see more of him, right? On the other issues that you raised, right, inequality, casino, which I think Derek has dealt pretty well, and on the minorities. I mean, the minority issues, I mean, certainly, I think the older Malays in Singapore would probably be accustomed to MM's views, right? I get a sense that the younger Malays, may not have are not taking it as well as their parents, which I think is probably the right thing to do, the right sort of reaction. But the big difficulty is that no party can try to campaign on race issues, right? You'll be treading on very dangerous grounds, But certainly, whether MM's remarks, would cost the PAP where the minority voters are concerned, is something that remains to be seen. On inequality, I think that obviously is a big concern, and I think when you look at the PAP manifesto, they refer to it obliquely, right? So they talk about helping lower income Singaporeans, but it is a big challenge, right? And the fact that that Singaporeans feel that society has become more unequal, right? Could affect the PAP's claim, right? That the whole idea of shared economic growth, right? Inclusive growth, right? That argument, may gain less traction.
I just want to add, since I didn't answer your point about the ethnic minorities, and this relates to the Malays and the Malay vote, the PAP apparently lost the majority Malay vote back in 1991, but it reclaimed the majority Malay vote in the 1997, 2001 and 2006 elections. There is now, in my opinion, the real possibility that the PAP may lose again the Malay ethnic minority vote, partly for the point that you made, but also this other issue that I have been asked about over the last few weeks by various people from the media, that in their own surveys, when they ask various demographics about their opinions of the influx of foreigners into Singapore, the Malays were the most sensitive to that. And the reason for that becomes all too apparent, because if the vast influx happens to be from the PRC and India, then it must necessarily mean a dilution in the Malay proportion eventually. So there could be some sensitivity on the part of Malays to that, and as to why they are less keen on this great influx of foreigners into Singapore in such a short time span.